Hi, my name is Sarah Holland, and I am doing a workshop on the social penetration theory. Before I get into any of the information regarding this theory, I want you to first think about the relationships in your life. I want you to think about the acquaintances you have, the friendships, the deep, close friendships you have, and maybe a spouse relationship as well. Thinking about those relationships as you listen to my presentation will help you understand the basis of this theory a little more. To start off, I want to first explain where the social penetration theory came from. It is part of interpersonal communication, and it is important to understand that foundation. Interpersonal communication is defined by Grimsley as interpersonal communication is the sending and receiving of information between two or more people. Basically, any interaction you have with another individual, any conversation that you have with another individual is interpersonal communication. And when you think about it, that's how relationships are developed in general. You start off by conversation. And that is where social penetration theory started. The definition of this theory by Littlejohn and Foss is social penetration became the term used to identify the process of increasing disclosure and intimacy within a relationship. Basically, the more information that you learn about an individual, the more information is disclosed to you, the more intimate you become. You start to peel back those layers of information, which is social penetration theory. Before I get into the really detailed information about this theory, I want to first acknowledge the founders of it. It was started by Irwin Altman and Thomas Taylor, and they were both very esteemed professors and researchers in relationship development. They wanted to create a theory that really captured the research of relationship development. So what they did was they took multiple interpersonal communication theories and combined them into one unified theory as a guideline for this type of research. Nicole Allensworth explains, from these theories, Altman and Taylor developed one unified theory which provided a stable base from which researchers could study. Basically, this social penetration theory creates an outline and a graph and a guideline for how to research these relationships and even how to understand your own relationships. The framework for social penetration theory has two different aspects of it. The first is breadth versus depth knowledge. I want to explain this a little more. Breadth knowledge is a multitude of information that you can know about an individual. It's a lot of different surface level type things. The depth knowledge is more detailed information that you wouldn't necessarily know unless specifically asked those detailed questions. Littlejohn and Foss say, according to the theory, you get to know another person by penetrating the sphere. The sphere contains both breadth and depth. You could learn many different kinds of things about another person, which is the breadth, as I explained, or you could increasingly detailed information about one or two things, which is the depth. And this is the basis of how to find more intimate knowledge about another individual. This can be explained more in the 4 layers of social penetration theory. The first is the orientation stage. This stage is public information that people may know. It's the things you can observe. For example, orientation stage, you may observe and you may know that I have brown hair, that I speak English, that I'm wearing a pink shirt, maybe I like the color pink. Those kind of things are found in the orientation stage. The next stage is the exploratory affective exchange stage. This stage is very self-explanatory. You explore different aspects of that individual. For example, I may be wearing a Celtics t-shirt. You could ask me, I see you're wearing a Celtics t-shirt. Does that mean you're from Boston? Typical questions such as that can give you more information into that intimacy, which will lead to the next level. The next level is affective exchange stage. This is where you start to get into more of the depth knowledge, the more intimate information that you may have with somebody. This is where you may ask detailed questions about morals or values or religion or certain opinions about deeper issues. this kind of information is not openly shared with just anybody. You gain that trust, and there's a benefit to sharing that information, knowing that there's not going to be as much of a risk with revealing that information with the other individual. Lastly is the stage of the stable exchange stage. This is the core of the information. This stage is typically in a marital relationship where you are the most intimate with an individual. You can start predicting behaviors as far as situations go. For example, my husband is very intellectual and he reacts in a very intellectual way, and I'm a very emotionally based person. Therefore, in a crisis situation, he may be able to predict that I will react emotionally without having to ask me how I feel. This leads to another example of the theory. As you see in the graph, it kind of looks like the inside of an onion. The onion theory is also the social penetration theory. You hear them exchanged in both ways. This is just another example of the breadth and the depth. Breadth knowledge is that surface level where you can get a lot of information, but it's not going to be deep information. And then the deeper you go is the more intimate information you will see. This is just a visual example of the social penetration theory and the layers of that. A very comical example of social penetration theory is in Shrek. Shrek says, onions have layers, ogres have layers. You get it? We both have layers. If you've seen this movie, Shrek is a very closed-off character. When he meets Donkey, or when he meets Fiona, his soon-to-be wife, he doesn't disclose any information other than the observable. However, the more time spent with Shrek, the more information, the more emotions start to emerge because of the trust that is formed. This is a perfect example of social penetration theory. Now I just want to explain a little more in depth about relationship examples. I want to go through social media interactions, cross-cultural friendships, mentorship, and marriage. These are examples that I've researched in social penetration theory at each stage. The first one is social media interactions. This is an example of the orientation stage. This is where you're going to find that common knowledge. You can observe pictures and you can find that public knowledge that isn't needed a question to ask it. However, there is a lack of nonverbal communication. Therefore, you're not going to be able to dive into the more intimate information because you're not going to know exactly how people are going to react or the motivation behind the information. Another example by Tang and Wang is, for interest topics, bloggers disclose with more depth to online audiences rather than parents, implying that bloggers might express themselves to attract like-minded friends online. This is just an example that you can put out information in order to gain like-minded friends on social media. However, that does not disclose a lot of depth necessarily because you need that face-to-face interaction that social media lacks. Next is cross-cultural friendships. The exploratory affective exchange stage is exemplified here. In order for it to dive into intimacy, Jurgensen summarizes points that there needs to be self-evaluation, an aspect of cultural similarity, but also that different backgrounds are becoming less significant. And this is seen in the exploratory affective exchange stage. You need to ask these types of questions in cross-cultural friendships in order to be able to find relatability, similarity. Those exploratory questions are asked at this stage. Next is mentorship. This is an example of the affective exchange stage. Mentorship can be a teacher-student or it can be a discipleship program as well. This is where more intimate information, more detailed questions are asked. You've passed through the exploratory stage and now you're asking the more in-depth, more personal type of questions. Dashner says, in order to create an effective teacher-student mentorship, interpersonal communication must penetrate through these layers so that the participants in the mentorship are able to be open and honest with one another in order to give and receive nurturing criticism. At this stage, if you're able to find those questions and ask those detailed questions, you're able to trust and receive that information and know that it is reciprocated in that same trust. The next is marriage. This is an example of the stable exchange stage. Honeycutt says, again, the manifestation of similar attitudes, opinions, and interests differentiates the couple from others. Thus, the belief that one's partner understands oneself reflects the point of integration between attraction factors and communication factors, as reflected in social penetration. Essentially, like I said before, you're able to predict opinions, you're able to know the depths of that person, and you have penetrated all the other layers in order to get this type of intimacy. Now, what can you take away from this type of information? Essentially, you know a deeper look into relational development. You can know how your own relationships are developed, and in future relationships, how they develop as well, and what information to disclose in order to receive more intimacy. You're also to evaluate your current information with relationships as well. And lastly, there's more understanding of intimacy. The intimate relationships that you have now, you're able to fully understand where they have come from and how they came to be. And that is the social penetration theory. Thank you.